Ladies and gentlemen, concerned, focused, vigilant Americans around the country and around the world, welcome to another installment of the Dispatches. All eyes of the world are on Washington. Everybody is anxiously awaiting the swearing in of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and there's a lot of focus on national security and the security apparatus that has now been installed upon basically the entire city. Given our national security focus, I want to go deeper, and I want to take you behind the scenes and below the headlines with a guy who I think is one of the best reporters in the country on this beat or any other beat. He is the national security and Pentagon reporter for the Washington Post. He's been embedded in Afghanistan. He's been at the Washington Post for, I think, about 10 years, and he's a must follow on Twitter. You should read everything he writes. A guy I've been honored to be in touch with and know, and a guy who I think represents all the best of what American journalism is all about. The great and powerful Dan Lamothe joins us. How are you, sir? Welcome.
Hey, Paul. Thank you.
So you're in D.C., man, and you just posted, we're recording this Tuesday night. Tomorrow is inauguration. You just posted a really important story that the National Guard have basically put on ice at least 12 members of the National Guard. We're all concerned about the extremist threat. We're all concerned about anti-government sentiment within the military, especially, frankly, those of us who've been in the military and been in the National Guard. I posted today, the National Guard couldn't find out who in my unit owed child support. I'm not incredibly confident that they're going to be able to vet 25,000 troops for extremism, but break it down for us. What does your reporting today and this week tell us that we need to know?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think the biggest question I have right now is what do they know and what do they not know? What we do know so far today, at least in terms of what's been disclosed, is that 12 National Guard members have been pulled out of formation, pulled off the line with this fence that's been constructed around the Capitol and other federal buildings. We know that 2 of those appear to have some sort of anti-government sentiment that they've expressed. General Hokanson, the chief of the National Guard Bureau, at one point referred to it as texts, at the other point referred to it as sort of online. I suspect it was on social media. We don't know exactly what they said. We asked that repeatedly, kind of as a press corps. So assuming it was something enough to at least trigger a red light there. The other 10 are names that the FBI sent back to the military and said, we have concerns about these individuals. Those 10 were supposedly not necessarily for extremist sentiment. So we don't really know what may have propped that, whether it's some sort of investigation, something they did, something they said, something in their history that somehow allowed them to be in the Guard but wouldn't allow them. I'm not even sure. But a dozen people. Now, granted, a dozen people out of 25,000 brings you to well less than 1%. And I do think we need to acknowledge that. The flip side of the coin is, we don't know how many others there may be that just kind of skated under the radar here, and for what.
Right, and it only takes one, right? It only takes one guy with a loaded mag to do some serious damage and do what I think is our greatest fear, at least in Washington, which is an insider attack of some kind. Can you take us deeper? You mentioned in the article how one of these guys was flagged having to do with a truck parked outside of the armory. Can you explain that a little bit and how that went down?
Yeah. So the tip was put in, and I think it was raised in a couple different places, but there was an individual who lives in the neighborhood of the armory in Southeast DC. He was walking by, I think probably partly curious, probably partly concerned, and kind of just taking a look at some of the vehicles through the fence line, visible from the street where any civilian could stand. And there were a bunch of 3%er stickers on a pickup truck in the lot. So turned it in to DC Council. A member of the DC City Council flagged that to the National Guard. We're not sure if that's one of the 2 individuals that they did have concerns about, or if that's some case yet to be determined. But it's certainly one that caught their attention. And I think it kind of goes to show that for all the talking about everything that's gone on since the insurrection on the 6th, you still got National Guard members rolling up to their assignments with 3% stickers all over their truck. And there's just a disconnect there in terms of what they think is okay and what is.
And we talked about this with Jason Dempsey. You know, I've been of the opinion that the military hasn't been aggressive enough in vetting out extremists and anti-government folks. I mean, I don't know how they can do this. I mean, so, you know, I was in a National Guard unit. I knew guys who were pretty extreme in their views that's likely only amplified. Anybody who's been in the National Guard and has a Facebook page knows a guy or a gal like that. That's the no shit, right? You know, the military is not a monolith. We're a reflection of the population. And, you know, if 1 in 300 have sympathies, that's a national security concern. So can you take us deeper on this, Dan? Do they have 25,000 FBI agents combing through 25,000 troops? I mean, how do they, are they going through everybody's Facebook page? How do they vet 25,000 troops in, you know, a week, basically?
No, I think that's a very real concern. And I think we've had very limited understanding and knowledge that they're willing to share, not only on the military side, but also the FBI side. We're aware that names were handed over to the FBI and names were run. Now, I'm assuming they're probably squaring that against existing databases and things like that they have handy. That's not necessarily a deep dive on every individual Facebook page and things of that sort. So I think they've probably found some low-hanging fruit. I don't know that they have everyone.
And it's, you know, like always, going to probably come down to good order and discipline in the military. If there's somebody who's a threat, it's going to be, you know, somebody else in their unit who flags it. The question is, can they action against that quickly enough? It kind of reminds me in some ways of the difficulty the military has had around sexual assault or sexual harassment. I mean, sometimes people take it more seriously than others. It comes down to often leadership at the chain of command at the unit level. So has there been any additional training? You cover this beat, man. Like if you're a National Guardsman from Texas or from Virginia, you got a call a week ago that you're going to DC. They haven't been trained in how to do insurrection response, right? Many of them have been doing hurricanes and wildfires, and we're in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this is very different, being deployed against a different kind of threat. So has there been any additional training for these guys and gals that are now hitting the ground in DC?
I mean, a lot of the initial training that we're hearing about is sort of the see something, say something idea. You know, and certainly there's some value in reinforcing that on a mission like this. You know, kind of just walking around the perimeter myself the other day. I was in DC over the weekend. You know, it's a whole lot of guardsmen, a seemingly overwhelming military response for a lot of standing around, at least ahead of time. You know, and you know, there's probably some value in just seeming so overwhelming that, you know, maybe that short circuits some attempts that might happen in the first place. The guardsmen are standing mostly at a chain link fence. There's a red zone and then a green zone outside the red zone. Red zone, I don't think you're seeing virtually anybody that is not like highly vetted, you know, has a specific government reason to be inside. The green zone outside, you do see civilians, you do see, you know, kind of locals walking around. That's where some of the photographs have popped up of people handing over cookies and things of that sort. Like they're kind of going up to that outer fence line, which is a few blocks from the Capitol. I was out near the Library of Congress on the eastern side of this sort of fortified area, and you know the conversations are pretty casual. I mean, you know, I was watching families talk to the guardsmen and sort of, you know, chit chat. You know, and they're 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and you know, we've seen the photographs and you know, some of the images inside the Capitol of people on cots, and before that on the ground, before that became a thing. I think the thing we need to look at looking forward, one of them is, you know, if the worst case nightmare were to happen, and there's one individual, say, in this group of 25,000 who doesn't want to do the right thing or has some sort of extremist sentiment that he's been hiding, I think even then there are numerous layers beyond that. The Guard is forming sort of an unprecedented outer layer of security. Inside of that, there's still police, there's still Secret Service. It's, you know, it's a layered defense with a very new fortified layer that didn't exist like this in previous inaugurations.
Dan, you've covered this stuff for a long time. Do you have a sense of what the response is like outside of DC? Because we know insurgencies, right? They may take a pass on the hardest target in DC, and they may go to state houses. They may go down to a local DMV. But did you get a sense from Pentagon leadership and National Guard leadership how prepared they are for other places beyond DC that are also high value targets?
Yeah, I did a lot of reporting in the tail end of last week, talking to states, governors, things of that sort, trying to get a sense for what their concern was. And one data point that they were worried about was over the weekend, the 17th, and then Richmond also had some rallies yesterday. So each governor can handle that as they wish. They activate at their own behest. Many states did, and many states that had problems over the summer, be it boogaloo sort of things. We saw, Lansing, Michigan, Richmond, Virginia, Oregon, some of the places that had problems already in the last calendar year were pretty proactive in activating. Some of them activated in sort of a standby status just to make sure they had a cavalry if they needed it. Some of them actually put guardsmen on the streets proactively, just put them there, and if any, I think again, kind of show of force, deterrent factor, whatever you want to call it. I think we're going to see the same sort of things for a while, and particularly on Inauguration Day. The concern becomes, at what point do you go back to normal? What point can you go back to normal? And then once you do, those softer targets as they reemerge, how's that going to work? How do you have sort of a steady deterrent factor without burning people out going forward?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The burnout factor is significant, right? These are National Guard troops that have been, overused in many ways for the last 20 years since 9/11. But speaking of 9/11, today it was reported that the military found a guy, a service member who had been trying to collaborate with ISIS to include, sharing information about targets to include the 9/11 memorial. Do you have any other information about how the military is expanding beyond the domestic threats? It seems like the threats are coming from all sides, but how do you see them as responding? And, bottom line, do you think they're ready for this, or are they still kind of head in the sand about how real the threat is and from how many places it's coming?
I actually think in some ways they're a lot more prepared for the international threats because those have existed for years. We saw ISIS sympathizers. We've seen, the concern on the flip side about Americans joining the counter ISIS movement and joining the YPG or whoever else. And they didn't consider that terrorism, but they were concerned about it. I think the domestic one actually is a lot more difficult so far because they don't screen the same ways that they have for decades now on the foreign threat.
Yeah, let me you I think spend some time with General Walker, who's been tasked with commanding the National Guard response. I was struck by his comments. He basically said, "There's not an extremism problem. I'm not concerned about it." That felt like echoes of the invasion of Iraq will be greeted as liberators to me. It just felt out of touch. Am I reading it wrong? What kind of a sense did you get from him? Because when I read the interviews, he seemed dangerously overconfident to me.
When I hear comments like that, I'm often wondering, what are you saying and what are you thinking? So this was a scenario where what I heard actually very much sounded like Pentagon talking points for years. And I think there's often an effort to sort of reassure civilians and make it sound like we got it. But then I'm always wondering what's being said behind the scenes and how are they changing, and do they view this as a onesie twosie kind of problem that they need to deal with very deliberately? How much are they thinking about adding additional layers? I would imagine one of the biggest problems you have if you're the DC National Guard commander right now is you went from having a few thousand under your command to 25,000 under your command for the week. You don't know all these folks. How could you? And you have been handed a mission that's pretty daunting to keep this very large perimeter safe. You need to rely on the folks you're sent. and yet at the same time, you're also now being told that you need to screen these people. I don't know that some missions are easily solvable. So I think there's a, sort of trying to deal with the worst case scenarios and hoping everything else works out well.
Yeah, I think that's a good read, Dan. The Pentagon talking points are often amplified in times like this, and I hope that there's a candor behind the scenes, because frankly, it stunned me. Like my immediate response is, if he's that confident, he should be fired, because anyone who's that confident, given the multitude of threats and the severity of the environment, and frankly, the knowledge of the National Guard. I mean, the National Guard doesn't have, the same high standards, and the unit's just not connected, right? Guys aren't in the unit and gals aren't in the unit every single day. You don't have close tabs on them. They're gone sometimes for a month or months, and you don't know what they're up to. So it felt dangerously overconfident to me. Let me ask you, while I've got you, you've been covering Afghanistan often when no one else is. As inauguration happens this week, we've got troops in Afghanistan that probably feel forgotten. I've called it Forgotistan. For someone who has been tuned out on Afghanistan for the last year, what do you think is most important for them to know during the week where we have a new commander-in-chief and a new Secretary of Defense who didn't get too many hard questions, or pending Secretary of Defense who didn't seem to get too many hard questions during his confirmation hearings about Afghanistan?
I mean, there's the obvious point, which is that Trump brought it down to 2,500 service members left in Afghanistan, seemingly devoid of a strategy that tied it to that. He wanted to bring the numbers down. Commander in chief, you can make that call, but there didn't seem to be a connection to the ongoing negotiations with the Taliban. There's also no sense for whether or not those negotiations with the Taliban ultimately can work or will work. So I think you're going to see a reset to a degree. These negotiations are still going to be ongoing. I'd imagine both sides are going to have to feel each other out for what's still the same and what's now different with a new administration. And then I think this is going to continue to kind of stay in the background and slowly plot out. On one hand, we've had no U.S. service member deaths in Afghanistan for a while, and that's a good thing. On the other hand, we're still seeing these targeted assassinations of journalists, of judges, of any number of Afghan figures. I haven't been to Kabul since I guess about February of last year, so I'm a bit dated firsthand. But we've all read the reports of sort of this creeping targeted violence and the kind of fears those create. I think it's fair to wonder what this looks like. And the Taliban's been pretty firm that they expect 0 service members. So what does that look like? Do you have some sort of enduring counterterrorism mission? And if you do, is it actually based in Afghanistan, or do we start kind of handling it more the way we're handling some other places like Somalia, where we've already pulled the troops out and we're running strikes and trying to do intelligence without actually having any boots on the ground, really?
So despite what Trump promised, the war in Afghanistan is not over. All our troops are not home. And in my view, there's been a war on the Pentagon politically from Trump, especially in the last couple of months, where he got rid of Esper, installed political actors. But there's also been, in my view, a political and public relations war against the media. Trump calls guys like you enemies of the people, right? And you had Esper and others who seemed to put the clamp down on the Department of Defense's communication, regular press briefings, things like that. As we look forward, I hope there will be increased transparency. There's a new SecDef coming in. There's a new commander-in-chief. What do you think is the legacy of the 4 years of Trump running the Pentagon? As a guy who covered the Pentagon, who walked the halls, what are the takeaways and what are the legacies of the Trump Department of Defense?
I mean, I think it was a constant scenario of being strained by the politics, like a lot of other parts of the government. I actually look at folks like Secretary Mattis and Secretary Esper, and I can understand some of the decisions they made. I don't necessarily like those decisions, and I don't necessarily think that they have all positive consequences. When you reduce briefings, when you reduce how frequently you speak to the media, when you reduce how frequently you let your subordinates also speak to the media. But I can understand it to a degree, only because everything got immediately echoed through the Trump lens. looking forward, hopefully there's some sort of reset. I think that's healthy um, for just open transparency, which is always going to be a concern of a reporter. And then there are a lot of times like I feel like I was able to in previous administrations. You can cover the operations and it's not always political. Sometimes it is, sometimes it needs to be, and you cover it as best you can, as fairly as you can. But politics refracted off of so many things that it didn't used to. It made it complicated every single day.
As a national defense, Pentagon security expert, you've covered insurgencies. I think now we're facing a domestic insurgency. As we look ahead, Dan, for the average American who wants to be prepared, who wants to stay vigilant, who wants to look down the road, how bad do you think it's going to get? And what do you think it's going to look like over the next couple of months in America?
Man, I wish I had a good read on that. And I think one of the successes as I have is I try not to be too predictive in what I think might happen, and hopefully get surprised a little less frequently as a result. I mean, I can see a world where this gets really difficult and really troubling. I can also see a world where January 6th is a wake-up call, and while you're going to continue to see arrests and you're going to see raids and rallies and things of that sort, that maybe there is some sort of reset, and there is at least a more active thought process that goes into how the government responds to QAnon, how the government responds to some of the militias. Everybody's got a right to free speech. We have a right to bear arms, but it's more the how you do these things that, I think is going to be an ongoing question.
Well, I know you'll continue to ask them. I got to thank you for your vigilance, for your tremendous reporting. The term patriot has gotten cannibalized a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I think you represent the kind of patriotism that exists in so much of the media, especially the national defense, veterans, and security media. You've been a guardian on the front lines, pushing for the truth for all of us. So, I hope that the hardest times of reporting are behind us and that you have the transparency and accountability that we all need. But I'm just really grateful for your reporting. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the Dispatches. We'll all be watching and really appreciate your work, man.
Thanks. Head down, do the job. That's
Yes,
the way
sir.
I look at it.
Yes, sir. Stay vigilant and stay frosty. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.